On that cold January night in 1977, when the door of a Berlin studio opened, nobody could believe their eyes. David Bowie was about to record the most mysterious album in music history, but the truly shocking part was that he couldn't remember who he was. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. Hansa Studios stood right next to the Berlin Wall in the heart of a divided city. From the studio windows, you could see the guard towers in East Berlin. This was one of the strangest recording locations in the world, and David Bowie wanted exactly that. But first, you need to understand how this story began. Los Angeles, 1975. David Bowie was at the peak of fame, but also on the edge of collapse. He slept 6 hours during the day, got lost in the studio at night. The music he made was magnificent, but the price was heavy. His body had dropped to 119 pounds. Every time he looked in the mirror, he saw a different face. Michael Harrison, Bowie's sound engineer at the time, had noticed something terrifying. David was starting to hesitate when saying his own name, he said years later. It was like he was trying to remember it. The Ziggy Stardust character had consumed him so completely that he didn't know who was left behind. During that period, Bowie's Los Angeles home was a horrifying place. The curtains were always closed. He lit the rooms with candlelight because the light from bulbs hurt his eyes. He drew protective symbols on the walls, poured salt in front of his door. David had become paranoid, said his close friend Sarah Mitchell. He constantly thought someone was after him. In reality, the only person chasing him was himself. He was running from the characters he'd created. One night, during a recording session, something happened. Bowie suddenly stopped, stepped away from the microphone and crouched in the corner. His hands were shaking, he couldn't breathe, his pupils were huge. "I forgot who I am," he whispered. "I'm serious, I can't remember who I am." Everyone in the studio froze. Bowie's manager immediately called a doctor. But when the doctor arrived, Bowie was strangely calm. He just kept asking the same question over and over. "What's my name? What's my real name?" This is where everything changed. A German producer named Thomas Kellerman had come to Los Angeles to visit Bowie. When he saw Bowie's condition, he was shocked. "If you stay here, you'll die," Kellerman said bluntly. "Come to Berlin. Nobody knows you there. There you can learn who you are again." Bowie looked into Kellerman's eyes and formed his first clear sentence in months. "When are we leaving?" 3 days later, David Bowie landed in Berlin. He had only one suitcase with him. He left behind the money, the fame, the costumes, the stage identity. When he walked out of the airport, nobody recognized him, and this was the freest moment he'd experienced in years. The first night, he sat in his hotel room and watched outside. In the Berlin streets, people were living their normal lives, coming home from work, picking up their kids from school, going to the grocery store. For Bowie, these scenes were fascinating. He'd forgotten what it meant to be normal. But you haven't heard the biggest secret yet. The first weeks in Berlin were quiet. Bowie settled into a small apartment in the Schöneberg neighborhood. Every morning he biked to museums. In the afternoons he sat in cafes watching people. At night he went for walks, sometimes until dawn. For the first time in his life, David was ordinary, Kellerman said. He went to the grocery store, rode the subway, waited in lines, and it was healing him. One afternoon in a small bookstore, he found a book about expressionist paintings. The old man at the register, not knowing who Bowie was, talked with him for hours about art. "This city has suffered," the old man said. "Ernst Schneider. War, division, the wall. But suffering taught us something. Real art doesn't come from being beautiful, it comes from being real." Bowie returned to his apartment that night and cried for the first time in months. But this time they weren't tears of fear, they were tears of relief. But music was calling him. Bowie's fingers were restless, his mind filled with melodies. Only this time the music he'd make would be completely different. In the middle of January, Bowie knocked on the door of Hansa Studios. The woman at reception didn't recognize who the thin, pale man in front of her was. "I want to rent a studio," Bowie said. "For how long?" "I don't know. Maybe a month, maybe 6 months, until it's finished." "Wait a minute, don't miss this detail." Bowie had brought something to Berlin. A small notebook. Inside were hundreds of words written, but none of them were in English. German, Russian, French words filled the pages in a mixed fashion. "David, do you know what these languages mean?" asked the studio manager Franz Weber. Bowie smiled. "No, but isn't music just a language anyway? Maybe we lose ourselves because we search for meaning." Franz was surprised when he heard this answer. The man in front of him wasn't the David Bowie he'd seen in magazine news. This man was deeper, more thoughtful, more fragile. When the first recording session began, what Bowie didn't surprise anyone. He set up synthesizers, placed drums in strange ways, pointed microphones at the window. "I want to record sounds coming from beyond the wall," he said. "Sounds from where there's no freedom." The studio crew looked at each other. This guy was either crazy or a genius, maybe both. The first recording was made at exactly midnight. Bowie just sat at the synthesizer and played random notes, but it wasn't random actually. Each note represented an emotion: fear, loneliness, hope, loss. "This isn't music," said the young sound technician Martin Becker. "This is an internal scream." Bowie turned his head and smiled. "Yes, exactly that. You won't believe it, but Bowie had planned this. For the next 3 months, Bowie came to the studio every night. But he was working during the days too. Museums in the mornings, libraries in the afternoons. He was studying expressionist art, researching the chaotic period of Weimar Germany. "Berlin made me confront my old self," Bowie said in an interview. "A divided city, a divided me. But here, in the shadow of the wall, I started putting the pieces together." One day, he went to Checkpoint Charlie. He stood right next to the wall and watched the east side. The guards were watching him, but Bowie didn't care. In that moment, he understood that this wall wasn't just dividing the city. It represented the walls inside people. A German couple was standing next to him. The woman was crying. "My mother is there," she said to her husband, "just 500 meters away, but I can't see her." Bowie never forgot that moment. That night he wrote in his journal, "Today I saw a wall, but actually I saw a mirror. Because I also built a wall inside myself, to escape from fame, from reality, from myself." "Everyone has a wall inside them," he told Franz that evening. "Between our real selves and the world, this album will be about tearing down that wall." Franz listened quietly. Then he asked something, "So when will your wall come down?" Bowie smiled. "It's coming down right now, with every note, with every word." The music made in the studio was extraordinary. Traditional rock instruments gave way to electronic sounds. The lyrics weren't meaningful, but each one captured an emotion perfectly. One night, Bowie was trying to write lyrics for a piece called Heroes. From the studio window, he could see the Berlin Wall. At that moment, he noticed 2 lovers, right next to the wall, kissing silently. "They're heroes," Bowie whispered, "just for one day, but that's enough." The next day, he went to the same place. The couple wasn't there, but other people were. An old man sitting on a bench, looking at the wall. A young woman taking photos. 2 children playing ball next to the wall. "Life goes on," Bowie said quietly. "Even with walls, life finds its way." That night in the studio, he recorded Heroes in one take. The sound technician Martin was amazed. "David, that was incredible, but why did you use 3 different microphones?" Bowie explained. "The first was for whispers, the second was for normal voice, the third was for screaming. Because heroism is sometimes silent, sometimes normal, but sometimes it's a scream." When the recording finished, everyone in the studio was silent. Franz Weber had tears in his eyes. "This isn't just a song," he said. "This is a manifesto." Franz Weber saw Bowie crying in the control room one night. "David, is everything okay?" Bowie raised his head. "For the first time in years, I feel who I am, and it's scary because I don't know that person." That's when the phone rang. It was Tony Visconti calling, Bowie's old producer. "David, have you seen the news? Everyone thinks you've disappeared. Some are even saying you're dead." Bowie was silent. Then he took a deep breath. "Maybe I did die. The old David died. Now there's someone new here. So who's the new you? I don't know yet, but I'm learning." Visconti decided to come to Berlin. When he heard the music Bowie was making, he was shocked. This was something he'd never heard before. Cold but just as emotional, mechanical but penetrating to the soul. "Nobody's going to understand this album," Visconti said. Bowie smiled. "I know, but I'm not making it for them. I'm making it for myself." Visconti's arrival brought new energy to the studio, but it was also a reminder of the old life. The first evening, Visconti told Bowie about the news from Los Angeles. Fans were worried. The record label was angry. The media was speculating. "I don't care," Bowie said. "For the first time, I don't care. We're not done yet. The real secret is coming now." By the end of March, the album was almost finished. But Bowie felt something was missing. One last piece was needed, but he didn't know what it was. One night, he left the studio and went for a walk. He walked all the way to the Berlin Wall. He stood on the west side of the wall and looked east. It was dark there. Only the lights of the guard towers were visible. Tears ran down Bowie's face, and in that moment he understood. What was missing was hope. This album was dark, cold and lonely, but without hope it had no meaning. Standing next to him was an old man, Ernst Schneider, the man from the bookstore, who noticed him. "Is everything okay, young man?" Bowie turned his head. "What are you doing here?" "I come here every night," Ernst said. "I have a daughter on the other side. Not being able to see her doesn't mean she's not there. That's what hope is. Believing in things we can't see." These words settled in Bowie's heart. He ran to the studio. He sat at the piano and started playing a melody. It was simple but beautiful. He played it over and over, improving it a little each time. When Franz Weber came to the studio at 4 a.m., Bowie was still at the piano. His eyes were closed, his fingers dancing on the keys. "Did you find it?" Franz asked. "Yes," Bowie said without opening his eyes. "I found myself." The last piece was recorded in one day. Bowie performed the song without writing any words. He just used his voice, sometimes not like a human, sometimes like an instrument. The song would be called "In the Shadow of the Berlin Wall." During the recording, something strange happened. Bowie's voice cracked, but Franz didn't fix it, because that break was perfect. It was the sound of being human. When the album was completed, Bowie organized a special dinner for the team. In a small German restaurant, at a modest table, they gathered. "I want to thank you," Bowie said, raising his glass. "When I came from Los Angeles, I was lost. When you lose yourself, your career, even your life, what's left?" There was silence. "Music remains," Bowie said. "Music always remains, and maybe that was all that was necessary." Martin Becker, the young sound technician, asked something. "David, are you scared? What will people think when the album comes out?" Bowie thought. "No, because this album isn't for them. This is for everyone who looks in the mirror every night and asks, 'Who are you?' For those who can't find the answer." But the story doesn't end here. The album was quietly released in April 1977. The initial reactions were mixed. Fans were shocked. Critics didn't know what to think. But over time, something started to happen. Musicians started listening to this album. They started coming to Berlin. Hansa Studios became one of the most important recording locations in music history. "Bowie taught us something," said famous producer Robert Schumann. "Losing yourself can sometimes be the only way to find yourself." The first week only sold 12,000 copies. The record label panicked, but Bowie was calm. "The right people will find it," he said, "in time." And he was right. 3 months later, the album started climbing the charts. 6 months later, it had become a cult classic. A year later, it was recognized as one of the milestones of music history. David Bowie recorded 3 albums in Berlin. Each represented a different stage of his journey. The first was Darkness, the second was Searching, the third was Rebirth. When he left Berlin in 1979, Bowie was a different person. He was healthier, he was happier, and most importantly, he knew who he was. Before leaving, he visited Ernst Schneider one last time. "Thank you," Bowie said. "You reminded me what hope is." Ernst smiled. "No, young man, you already knew. You just needed to remember." When they thought it was over, Bowie had been reborn. Years later, in an interview, they asked Bowie about the Berlin period. "That period saved my life," he said. "In Los Angeles I was lost. I was crushed under fame, success, everyone's expectations. In Berlin I became anonymous, and being anonymous set me free. So what happened to the music? The interviewer asked. Bowie smiled. The music was always there. I just needed to be quiet enough to listen. At Hansa Studios today there's a small plaque. It reads, "Here David Bowie found himself, and in doing so, showed all of us the way." Every year thousands of musicians come to Berlin. They go to the studio next to the wall. They sit in the room Bowie used, and maybe they too find what they're looking for. Because sometimes to find yourself, you first need to get lost. During those cold winter months in Berlin, David Bowie experienced one of the most important transformations in music history. Ziggy Stardust died. The Thin White Duke died. Only David remained, and David was enough. These albums are considered classics today, but back then it was just one man's survival story. The story of art, music, and most importantly, finding yourself. Franz Weber gave one last interview before retiring. "I'll never forget those days working with David," he said. Because in those days we weren't just making music, we were witnessing a human being's rebirth. When David Bowie died in 2016, the city of Berlin mourned. They left thousands of candles in front of Hansa Studios. They placed flowers on the remnants of the Berlin Wall. And Ernst Schneider, that old bookstore owner, cried quietly. "I gave him hope," he said, "but he gave us so much more." Martin Becker, the young sound technician who had become a famous producer, made a statement that day. "In 1977, I watched a man be reborn in a studio. That man taught me what music is, not just notes but a form of saving lives." Franz Weber's son published his father's notes. Among them were these lines, "David Bowie taught me the most important lesson. Success isn't in perfection, it's in honesty. He didn't come to Berlin to be perfect, he came to be real." Hansa Studios kept the room Bowie used exactly as it was. The synthesizers, the pianos, even the window is the same. And every year thousands of young musicians go there and ask the same question, "Can I find myself here?" The answer is always the same, you won't find yourself, but you can confront yourself, and that's more important. The walls fell, the city united, and Bowie's music is still heard. In the corridors of Hansa Studios, in the streets of Berlin, and in the ears of everyone in the world trying to tear down their own walls. In recent years, a researcher discovered something interesting. That small notebook Bowie used during his Berlin years was found. The pages didn't just have words. There were small drawings, dates, moments. On one page it said, January 15, 1977. "Today for the first time I felt relaxed while drinking coffee. Nobody asked me for a photo. I just drank my coffee. Could happiness be this simple?" On another page, "Every time I see the wall I see myself. Divided, fragmented, but still standing." And on the last page, the final lines Bowie wrote before leaving Berlin, "I came here to die, but I learned to live." That's the difference. Because David Bowie taught us the most important lesson there. Getting lost isn't scary. Being afraid of getting lost is scary. And maybe we all need to get a little lost to truly find ourselves.